Emeritus Chief Rabbi Lord Sachs, Mum and Dad, Michael Goldstein, President of the United Synagogue, or POTUS for short, Dr. Stephen Wilson, Chief Executive of the United Synagogue, David and Richard, Directors of the United Synagogue, co-chairs and president of this phenomenal community, family and beloved friends. Thank you so much for joining us for a very, very special evening. This evening, Shuli and I truly feel even more blessed to be a part of this community than we did when we joined 10 years ago as a young, sprightly and eager rabbinic couple. And we thank you all for your advice, care, encouragement, humour, tolerance, feedback, and above all, friendship. This evening is the beginning of a new journey. And I want to thank Ruth Green for coming up with the idea for the community to embark on a learning project, a learning program together. No matter our level of Jewish learning, there is always more to do, and the power of learning is immense. As Rabbi Sachs challenges us, we have to make Judaism more compelling, intellectually, ethically, and spiritually. Our values, heritage, and way of life can provide a framework to face the challenges of the 21st century. Please join us this year on our journey of the 10 paths to God. There are many ways of finding God, many paths to the divine presence, and we are thrilled to be starting the first of our 10 paths this evening. Before I introduce Rabbi Sachs, I want to thank Joanna and Dan from Rabbi Sachs's office for being such good friends and for making this evening happen. We are so grateful for this and for everything you do to help Rabbi Sachs. And it's an incredible honour and thrill to welcome back the Emeritus Chief Rabbi Lord Sachs, one of the very few people in the world who really does not need to be introduced, as any introduction would only serve to be a disservice. Instead, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, Rabbi Sachs, for your outstanding leadership, support, and guidance, both on a personal level and on behalf of this community. Anglo Jury is so blessed to have you in our midst as we and the rest of the Jewish world, and the rest of the world in fact, continue to benefit from your remarkable output. It was only this morning that I turned on Radio 4 on the way back from shul to be inspired by your latest thought for the day. There are few things that can lift a person at that time in the morning in this weather. And as a result, my day so far was so much better than it could have been. Thank you. We're so excited that you are here to help us start on our learning journey. And without further ado, please could everyone stand for our Emeritus Chief Rabbi, Lord Sachs.
Many, many thanks. Kvoda Rav, Kvoda Rebbitzin. Is this yours?
Yeah.
Are you going to send me texts? Showing good, you know.
It's recording.
No, it's recording. I just switched it off. What can you do when phones are smarter than you are? I have to tell you, I actually use my phone to tell me how long I've been speaking. After 10 minutes it says showing good. After 15 minutes, give us a break. But every so often I forget to set the thing to stop it turning off after 2 minutes. And it turns itself on, and then I've pressed this button thinking the phone's going to come on again, and instead Siri comes on and starts commenting on what I've just been talking about. So, sorry about that. Let me press my button. You've got your one working. Thank you. Friends, what a delight and honor to join you on this incredible occasion of your paying tribute. And my goodness, tribute was never better out to your wonderful Rabbi Nicky Liss and your wonderful Rebbitzin Shuli, who have been the most fantastic presences in our midst. And I have to say, I feel proud, and I hope you do, to have a rabbinate that contains in it people like Rabbi Nicky and Rabbi Shula. They are sensational. You always were a great and warm community, but to see how you've grown and see physically and spiritually and in every other way under this during this remarkable 10 years, it's brought joy to me. And Elaine and I never come away from here without feeling very, very especially inspired. And it's just great to see a community that loves its rabbi and rebbitzin because they know its rabbis and rebbitzin love them. Sorry, did I say something indelicate? But it's been absolutely fantastic. Of course, now your rabbi is chair of the RCUS, so he's lifting the whole of the United Synagogue Rabbinate, and he's just been great. And I'm sorry I'm going to miss your Desert Island discs, but you'll have to forgive me. I've got to get back, but I know they're going to be a better choice than mine, because I don't know if you know this, I did the first Desert Island discs for, what's it called? Classic FM. They asked, I did it for the BBC back in 1990, but I did it for Classic FM. And it was an offer I couldn't refuse, but it was really embarrassing. Because I was in my year of Avelut, I was saying Kaddish, for my late father, Oliver Shaw. And you can't play happy music during your year of Avelut. So I said, look guys, I'm happy to do this program, but please explain to the listenership that everything on it is going to be miserable because they forgot to explain this. So everyone said to me, how come you only like miserable music? I have to say you're going to have much more joyous music because you have a much more joyous rabbinical couple at your head. And may these sweet sounds send you off your way to the next decade where you grow together, you and the Rebbitzin and the community, and you continue to inspire all who enter your doors. Friends, it was so lovely that you and your Rav decided to, as it were, as an introduction to this, to take this journey of learning together around what is for us, for myself and my team of Joanna and Dan, the first that we've ever tried to do in this precise way, create a set of educational materials that are challenging but are accessible and which are very open-ended and which will encourage you to grow. They start with a trigger video, they've got all sorts of work materials, and I hope you'll find it interesting and maybe even inspiring. 10 paths to God. So we hope in the fullness of time that this will, because it's very internet and iPad friendly, become a global program. And therefore, Rabbi Liss, you are the first United Synagogue rabbi to adopt the program, but this is actually the global launch of what we hope will be a truly international program. And it all began here in Highgate because of you and Rabbi Shuli. So thank you so much. The first unit is on the path of identity. And I'm not going to tell you what the unit contains, so I really leave that to you to learn, but I just wanted to introduce it by way of where we stand in the Jewish year, Parshat Vayeshev, the story of Joseph, and Hanukkah, which is on its way, and see how they relate to the issue of Jewish identity and to where we are in the dilemmas we face in the contemporary world. And let me begin by pointing out that not all languages contain the same vocabulary. There's some words that every language lacks. Have you noticed this? So for instance, I remember years ago I received something called the Jerusalem Prize, which was really nice because they give it to you in Jerusalem, on Yom Yerushalayim, on Jerusalem Day, at Beit HaNasi, at the President's house. And I will never forget this ceremony because the President of Israel at the time happened to be a very secular Jew. And he's reading out the citation and he says, I see Rabbi Sachs, he said all this in Ivrit, I said, I see Rabbi Sachs is getting his award for religious education in the diaspora. And then he paused and he said, religious education in the diaspora Sorry, can you hear me? Because I actually switched my microphone off. It's now on, okay? Don't tell me it was better when you couldn't. So he said, religious education is better than nothing, but, and then it made a tirade against religious education and said what we really need is secular schools that teach people to speak Hebrew, and that's it. When I came back, I had every month a breakfast with the Israeli ambassador. I said, Kvod HaShukri, and now I understand why after 4,000 years, the Hebrew language still doesn't have a word that means tact. It's true, ask any Israeli, what's the Hebrew for tact? Hebrew, tact, tact. They've got to use the English word. So there's certain words the vocabulary is like. And there is a word that Hebrew lacks, and that word is ambivalence. We don't have a word for it, but we have a tune for it. And there is a very unusual note in Kriyat HaTorah, in reading the Torah. It only appears 4 times in the whole of the Torah, and it's called a shalshelet. Do we have a... You're the musical guy here, Rabbi Liz. Can you sing us a shalshelet? Sorry to put you on the spot here, but yeah? How's it going? Exactly. Anyway, it's this incredibly long, drawn-out, protracted note, which seems to just pause and stop at the word and not be able to go on to the next word. That is a shalshelet. And it appears only 4 times, and it is always a commentary on the text itself, and it's always about ambivalence. So I'm only going to mention 2 instances, the 2 of the 4, and you'll see exactly what I mean. So I want to begin with a story we read a few weeks ago, the story of Lot in Sodom. You remember? He's there in Sodom. 2 angels come to visit him. They tell him to leave because God is about to destroy the place. And they say, you've really, really got to leave. And what does he do? Vayit ma. He delays. And over that word is a shalshelet. And I want to explain to you why that word appears where it does. What's going on? And as you know, the situation is this, and it happens to all of us at times. Who exactly are we? You remember Lot and Abraham. You remember there was a bit of a quarrel between their shepherds. You know, the first Jewish quarrel in history, but not the last. Okay? And Abraham says, let's separate, and wherever you go, I'll go in the other direction, we'll be fine. And Lot sees Sodom and the cities of the plain, they're incredibly prosperous, and he decides to go there. And as we look at chapter 19, when the angels come to visit him, where is he sitting? He is sitting in the city gate. Now, who sat in the city gate in ancient times? Do you know? Pardon? It was the judges. Cases were heard at the city gate, and that's where the judges sat. So as Rashi and the Midrash explain, he had just been made a judge. You remember the people come and say, bring out your visitors, you know, it's a horrible scene. And he says, no, my 2 daughters. And then he tries to tell, the angels try and say, you've got to leave. And Lot goes and speaks to his 2 sons-in-law, who are local boys, they're inhabitants of Sodom. And so here we have a situation, the first assimilated Jew in history. His daughters are both married, local boys. He's just been made a judge. He thinks he has arrived. He's been accepted. It is just then that we hear what I think are the first recorded words of anti-Semitism in history. when he says to the people surrounding his house, demanding that he bring out his two visitors, he says, please don't do this, they've come under the roof of my house, I have to protect them. And they say to him, Ha'echad ba lagur. Look at this guy who's just arrived, this immigrant, this guy who's not one of us. V'shafot shafat, and he's going to judge us? He is not accepted as one of them. He's a foreigner, he's a Jew. And how dare he presume to tell us what to do? I think those are the first recorded words of anti-Semitism in history. And then he goes to his sons-in-law and tells them, we've got to leave because the place is about to be destroyed. And what do we read? Vayhi kimetzachek be'enei chatanav. He appeared to his sons-in-law like a joker, like an old fool. Here is Lot, who put his heart on becoming a fully integrated member of this city of the plain with its prosperity. And the people of the town think he's presumptuous and a Jew, and his sons-in-law think not that he's a judge, but that he's a joker. He's a joke. And now you understand why Vayit Mama, when the angels want to get him to leave, and he can't make his mind up. Do I leave? Don't I leave? His whole life story has been built on, I've separated from Abraham, I'm going to be part of this community, this prosperous society. That's who I am. I'm one of them. Or am I actually Abraham's nephew, a Jew? So the first shalshelet in the Torah is a shalshelet of ambivalence. Ambivalence about identity. Who am I? Am I one of the surrounding society, or am I a Jew? And that is the first act of ambivalence in history. The second one appears in this week's parasha. Joseph. You remember the story of Joseph. He seems doomed. His brothers hate him. They plan to kill him. They throw him into a pit. He gets sold as a slave. And yet, despite the fact that his life seems over, when he gets to Egypt, he's actually very successful, so much so that his master Potiphar leaves everything in his hands. He is the master of the household. He's young, he's handsome. And what happens? Potiphar's wife, I haven't watched television for so long. This is a standard soap opera thing, right? She wants to seduce him. He's young, he's handsome, he's unattached, and she tries to seduce him. And does he allow himself to be seduced? It says, Vayama'en, he refused. But over that word is a shalshelet. Because he wasn't sure. He was torn. And let me explain why. The answer is very simple. There in Egypt, this is the first time he's ever been really appreciated. You know, his brothers thought, here's a spoiled kid, and they hated him. They hated him for his dreams, from his many-colored dream coat and whatever else, and they hated him. And now all of a sudden he's appreciated by his master, and his master's wife wants to sleep with him. This is quite tempting if you're Joseph. It's quite tempting if you're not Joseph. Number two, look, he's young, he's a handsome Pharaoh. Potiphar's wife is doubtless seductive. I don't know who plays her in the Netflix serial, I don't know, but you've got the picture. And number three, don't forget where he came from. He came from a family of nomads. And now in his bright lights, big city. This is Egypt. This is metropolis. This is it. Besides which, if he gave in, who would ever know? His family have no contact with him. Besides which, he's far from home. He thinks his family have rejected him. And he thinks maybe in Egypt, if you live in Egypt, maybe you live like an Egyptian. And the rabbi said that one thing saved him. As he was just being tempted, there came into his mind a picture of his father Jacob saying to him, "One day your brothers will all be precious stones on the breastplate of the high priest, and you want your name to be missing and for you to be known as a friend of prostitutes." And it is that moment, what did Freud call it? The superego, the internalized voice of your parents saying no. And it is that moment that saved him. But you see what the Vayama'en was about. It was about that ambivalence. Am I this successful young man in Potiphar's house? Am I an Egyptian? Or am I Joseph, son of Jacob, a Jew? And of course, he didn't have angels to schlep him out, but he did in the end have the voice of his father, and in the end Lot was saved, and Joseph went on to greatness, because they said, no, at the end of the day, a Jew I am, and a Jew I remain. And that takes us on to Hanukkah. We tend to tell a story about Hanukkah, that it was the Jews against the Greeks. And that's the way we tell the story. The Tzaddikim, the Maccabees, against Antiochus IV. He was one of those political leaders who rather fancied himself. I'm sure they don't exist anywhere. He had himself modestly named Epiphany, Antiochus Epiphanes, which means God made manifest. So he fancied himself, and that's the way we portray it, his vain Syrian Greek ruler against the Jews. And it's half true, but only half true, because actually the real battle of Hanukkah was a battle within the Jewish people itself, between loyal Jews and Hellenized Jews. And I don't think we realize just how many and how profoundly Hellenized Jews actually were. Don't forget, Jews had been conquered by empires before, by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians. But it was the Alexandrian conquest of Alexander the Great, which put Israel under Greek rule, that for the first time brought them up against a civilization that they could not feel superior to. Don't forget, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the rest, they were pagan civilizations, they were polytheistic cultures, they believed in myth, they believed in mystery, they believed in magic. The Greeks weren't like that. Alexander the Great was the pupil of Aristotle, who was the pupil of Plato, who was the pupil of Socrates. These were the three of the greatest philosophers the world has ever known from that day to this. The Greeks had the great historians, the first great historians, Herodotus and Thucydides. They had the great dramatists, Aeschylus and Sophocles. They had art and architecture that still, in many ways, Greek architecture has never been surpassed. And Greek art remains it was Europe rediscovering Greek art that led to the Renaissance and Florence and Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. And Jews felt for the first time, at least some Jews did, this is a civilization that makes sense to us. We want to become Greek because the Greeks are cosmopolitan and the Jews are parochial. Well, besides which, even if they didn't read philosophy or drama, the Greeks created something else, which we still celebrate today, called the Olympic Games. Don't forget, that was created in Greece in the 8th century BCE, the time of Isaiah. Isaiah's a pretty great guy, but when the Olympic Games are on television, I don't know what kind of audience he gets against the Olympics. So, all in all, the fact is that Jews felt very drawn. Many felt very drawn to Greek culture. Besides which, the first 100 years of Jews under Greece, they were under the rule, the empire divided after the death of Alexander into the Ptolemies based in Egypt and the Seleucids based in Syria. And for the first 100 years, the Jews were under the Ptolemies of Egypt, who were a pretty tolerant bunch. Ptolemy II ordered the first ever translation of the Torah into another language, into Greek, the so-called Septuagint, the translation of the 70 sages. And there was a huge Jewish community in Alexandria, very prosperous. You know, the Gemara tells us about the shul they had in Alexandria. Not like Highgate, I have to say. I can think of some shuls in its life. The shul was so noisy that they had to have a guy on the bimmer waving a flag every time it was time to say Amen. Reminds you of other shuls from which you have been saved by your wonderful Rabbi. So Jews did well under the Greeks, and many of them Hellenized in many sorts of ways. Of course, in the 2nd century, when Antiochus III actually defeated the Ptolemies, and Israel came under his control, and then under Antiochus IV, he was a lot less tolerant and believed in forcing the pace of Hellenization. But the fact is that the people who encouraged him to do this were Jews themselves. There was, you know, there was a high priest called Joshua, who, to show how Greek he was, changed his name to Jason, and told Antiochus IV, you know, you can bring all sorts of Greek stuff to Israel. He sent his brother, younger brother, Menelaus, to see Antiochus IV to do this deal. Menelaus decided, no, I'm actually going to make a better deal with Antiochus, and I'm going to be high priest instead of my brother. And eventually it was Menelaus who persuaded Antiochus IV to do those terrible things that he did, install a statue of Zeus in the temple precinct, build a gymnasium. Does anyone know what the word gymnasium actually means? It actually means exercising naked. That's how the Greeks exercised. Rabbonish idism. But they built this gymnasium for naked wrestling just on the Temple Mount, at the foot of the Temple Mount. And one way or another, they turned the Beit HaMikdash and the Holy of Holies into a Greek sort of temple. And the Book of Maccabees has this wonderful phrase. The Jews felt this is one step too far. They called it the abomination of desolation. That's what they called it. And that's when Matisyahu and his sons and their supporters rose up and rebelled and won the victory. So Hanukkah, which we have always told the story of as Jews against Greeks, was actually this story about ambivalence within the Jewish people itself. This shalshelet, who are we? Are we Greeks of the Jewish persuasion, or are we really Jews? And it was, of course, the Jews who stayed Jewish, who, believe it or not, even though they were very tiny, and even though, of course, they scored this incredible military victory over the Greeks, which was the first time until really 48 and 67, that a Jewish event changed the course of history. You know that Hanukkah is the only festival of all the festivals that is mentioned in non-Jewish sources. You know, although the Exodus took place in Egypt, we have not yet found any reference in Egyptian texts to Pesach. Shavuos doesn't appear anywhere. Sukkot doesn't appear anywhere in non-Jewish texts. Purim, when you read the Megillah, it says, are not the doings of the Mordechai and Esther ketuvim b'sifrei, what is it? Divrei Hayamim shel Madai Pras, and they're not written in the chronicles of the Medes and the Persians. But we haven't yet found that particular chronicle of the Medes and Persians that tells the story of Purim. The story of Hanukkah is told by all ancient historians because it did change the course of world history. It was the beginning of the end of Greece and the beginning of the rise of Rome. So it changed world history. And yet, nonetheless, the fact remains that the essence of the story is that Jews who stayed loyal to Judaism ensured that we are Jews today. If they had Hellenized, there'd be no Judaism, no Jews, no Christians, no Muslims either. And the fact is that it was that one decision which Joseph had made, which Lot was forced to make, to say, despite all the temptations, a Jew I am and a Jew I remain. And because of that, the Jewish spirit remained eternal and immortal and is embodied and symbolized in the Hanukkah lights. So it turns out that, really and truly, all of these are the first way Jews have confronted the issue of how are we related to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? How are we related to God? And it's the way of identity. That somehow we have believed as Jews that for everyone else, God is a friend, but for us, He's mishpacha. Does that make sense? Banim atem l'shem Elokechem. What does God say to Moses to say to Pharaoh? Bani b'chori Yisrael, my child, my firstborn, Israel. And even when Jews argue, and even when they argue with God, it's a family row, okay? So family rows are always the best rows. They really are, because you argue with a friend today, tomorrow is no longer your friend. But you argue with family, tomorrow they're still family. So you can afford to have the best rows within the family. But the fact remains that we have seen our identity as something unique and something special and something that we need, and we believe that the light we light as Jews lights up the world. Because we've always believed to be true to your faith and a blessing to others, regardless of their faith. And that brings us to the issue of Jewish identity today. You know, it's really, really tough that we live in this paradoxical world. I know anti-Semitism has returned. Some politicians don't like us very much. Israel is isolated. Israel is divided. And Arsenal ain't doing all that well. So, you know, this I call the Oivei theory of Jewish identity. You know, Gewalt. But the fact is that if you think about it, we have been around for a very long time, twice as long as Christianity, 3 times as long as Islam, and in all those almost 4,000 years of history, never before, ever, have we had simultaneously what we have today: sovereignty and independence in the land and state of Israel, freedom and equality in the diaspora. There were times when we had one, times when we had the other, but never both at the same time. And the real tragedy is that in the United States, for instance, outside Orthodoxy, the outmarriage rate is 70%, and of those who bring up their kids as Jews, almost none. We are losing Jews at the fastest rate since the lost 10 tribes. And that's so tragic, because one way or another, do you know what? I know we all went throughout the Jewish world. We were just observing the Shloshim in Pittsburgh. And we all went, and we all know how vulnerable we are. But the fact is that in the United States, when you do the research and the surveys, you will find that Jews are the most respected minority, ethnic or religious, in the United States. There's no reason for people to walk from Judaism and say, I'm just an American. It's a kind of ambivalence that is really not destructive. Why? Because people say, I don't just want to be Jewish, I want to be an American. You know how Jackie Mason, you remember the comedian Jackie Mason? I love Jackie Mason because the first time I knew him back in the 60s, he used to have this wonderful opening line, the best opening line I've ever come across. He used to say, I may start slowly, but little by little, I die out completely. So Jackie Mason used to have this line, they laugh at my jokes, and then they say, too Jewish. Or here's the way, for those with a doctorate in philosophy, the late Sidney Morgenberger of Columbia University used to say, Jewish identity in America is incognito ergo sum. But don't need too many footnotes somehow. And I say to myself, listen to this logic. If only Monet, the Impressionist, had been less French. If only Tolstoy had been a little less Russian. If only Shakespeare had been less English. If only Beethoven had been less, or Brahms, you're going to do the violin concerto, less German. They really would have appealed to everyone. The fact is that it's precisely because Monet was so French and Beethoven so German and Shakespeare so English and Tolstoy so Russian that they speak to everyone. Our uniqueness is our universality. Because by being what only we are, we contribute to humanity what only we can give. And that is why it is by being Jewish that we contribute something unique to humanity. And that unique contribution, I once wrote a little book about this and argued that Judaism is the voice of hope in the conversation of humankind. If you think about it, that's what Jews have shown every single age. I think the symbol of that is Hanukkah. You remember the famous question, we light 8 lights of Hanukkah to remind us of the miracle of the oil that should have burnt 1 day, but instead lasted 8. And all the rabbis asked the obvious question. We should only light 7 lights, because the first night was no miracle. Are you with me? It was going to light anyway. So we should only light for the last 7 days. Why do we light Hanukkah on the first night? And I said to this, I give the obvious answer. The obvious answer is that the miracle of the first night is that they found among all the wreckage and all the defilements of the temple one little cruse of oil that was undefiled. And why did they find it? Because they looked for it. And why did they look for it? Because they know that there's always something there that can ignite hope. Jews never gave up hope, but somehow they would find something undefiled. So maybe I can just end with a little statement about, a little story about the guy who's playing your Brahms violin concerto, Yitzhak Perlman. You know Yitzhak Perlman, the violinist, and you know that he suffered as a child from polio, and he's in a wheelchair. And there's a famous story about Yitzhak Perlman. I'm not sure if it's true or not. I had the privilege of meeting him once, and I said, Yitzhak, is the story true? And with an enormous smile, he said, no. But I'm going to tell you the story anyway, because I think it is true, and he was too modest to say so. There's a famous story that he's playing a concerto, I don't know if it was the Brahms, and in the first movement, there's a big crack, and a string breaks. And he plays, instead of calling for a new violin or a new string, he, in an incredible display of virtuosity, plays the rest of the concerto on 3 strings. When it comes to the end, there's a huge, huge standing ovation for him. And they call him back on stage to say something. And he came back on stage in his wheelchair and said this sentence: it is our job, our task, to make music with what remains. One of the most moving stories I've ever heard. And that is because Jews know that something will always remain. Like the light of Hanukkah. And that is our role in the world. To light a light where other people despair. To make music with what remains. To turn the darkest night into some illumination, because we don't curse the darkness, we light a candle. I think that is an identity to be proud of. Let us wear that identity with pride, and we will find that we won't be respected less. We will in fact be respected more, because we respect ourselves. And how can others respect us if we don't respect ourselves? So that is the first way, and the introduction to the first unit, of which you are the first to actually embark on this task. So thank you for joining me on this 10-part journey. Thank you for the wisdom in choosing such a brilliant Rav and Robertson. Thank you for a lovely evening, which is going to get a whole lot better because it's going to have music soon. And thank you again for growing and being inspired by our wonderful Rav and Robertson list.